Hi everyone, I'm Will Butler. I'm a PhD candidate from Blaseball University. My research largely concerns preservation of live service video games, specifically looking at the role and responsibility of game developers within the preservation ecosystem. So last year, a very scary report was published by the Videogames History Foundation that found that only 13% of US released video games are currently available. Actually, available is interesting. It's all right. That is a survival rate 1% worse than silent era movies in America. And this caused a lot of kind of fear around the preservation of video games, and kind of, a bit of a kind of a lot of advocates come out for preservation. One of the assumptions in that report said that the game developers weren't necessarily responsible for the preservation of their own creation. That's, in my research, I'm interested in challenging that. So largely going into game studios and co-developing methods of preservation with them, especially live service video games. Today I'm going to kind of make an argument for a new framework, a more flexible framework for preservation, using Internet League Blaseball as an example. Kind of looking at this idea of a porous video game, the kind of something that we'll get into, and Danny did touch on this idea that the paratext, metatext, the interaction with the game will change the object, and in turn will change the users. And that is even more the case when we're talking about live service video games start changing constantly because of updates and patches and new content and community changes, which takes us on to Blaseball. Thanks so much. Has anyone actually heard of Blaseball? Yes. Right, so this is Blaseball. It is a browser-based service baseball fantasy simulator. The kind of core loop of the game is that you pick a team to support, you use coins to make bets on how games work. Games will play out across a season, which is a week of real time. And you will use your winnings to buy raffle tickets and votes to change aspects of the game. So change statistics, change certain kind of game modifiers that affect the simulation. And throughout that, it creates these really interesting emergent events that happen within the game. So an interesting kind of story of one is called Grand Unslam, which is this kind of legendary Blaseball event where within the universe of the simulation, space and time was disrupted. But what actually happened was the developers, the game band, who are not web developers, got too much traffic during the pandemic when this got really popular. And what happened was the server refreshed and the game went back in time and then played out differently. This was interpreted by the community as, oh, space-time has broken in Blaseball. And then the developers said, you know what? Yes, space-time has broken, and it informed the narrative of the next season of Blaseball. So, we have an example here of how even something as silly as a game bug on the web development side can change the trajectory of Blaseball. And that is only possible because Blaseball is not just this. Thanks so much. This is also Blaseball. So there we have season 11 Chicago Firefighters lineup, fan art. We have the Deaths of Sebastian Telephone, the musical about the events of Sebastian Telephone, which is a fan-made Blaseball musical. But don't worry, there are in-universe musicals available on Bandcamp about players within the Blaseball community. We've got a propaganda poster here, which kind of expresses anti-Baltimore crab sentiment because they were winning too much. We've got here a historical breakdown of what happened to the Grand Unslam, or the Grand Sham as it was known at the time. Then we've got a post on r/hobby drama about a kind of interpersonal argument that happened within the role-playing Discord, which was a really vital part of the Blaseball community, was people who were role-playing as Blaseball characters on Twitter. Interpersonal kind of arguments led to the closing down the Discord, and it was a really important aspect of the game. So this is all to say that playing Blaseball is not as simple as just going on the website and watching the games play out. I really like this headline from Alex Bell of the Shotgun, who says, browser game sensation Blaseball is mostly played on Twitter. That's amazing. So, this really forces us to kind of extend our thinking, our understanding of Blaseball as a cultural object, to stop thinking that it's singular, stop thinking within the materiality of Blaseball is just the kind of the game on the website. It's not thinking that it's porous. You know, while literally Blaseball is about watching these 15-minute games play out and enjoying the tweets as they go by, the narrative events and the kind of emerging gameplay that happens becomes folklore. It becomes a myth. And that myth will start to change how the game is made. As I gave the example with the Grand Iron Slam. You know, it's a game that is largely multi-textual. And it's, you know, it's played across forums and Discord servers, and within the development themselves. The game banned this talk in 2022 at GDC, called Game Development as Performance, where they described the creation of Blaseball as a game development performance on a digital stage. So they themselves see themselves as kind of actors within the kind of the Blaseball folklore. So, you know, what does this mean for us as preservationists? Well, we need to reconsider the ontological nature of video games as extending beyond kind of this, you know, in-game and into the dimensions of the discursive and the cultural and the mythic and the folkloric. So, you know, in my research, I'm kind of interested in a few questions. Is how do we preserve a game that is more multi-user performance than playable object? How do we preserve games if we understand that we're always changing? What is the object to preserve there? And then, and this is a spoiler for the fate of Blaseball, I'm very sorry, how do we preserve games that were always changing and are now gone? So, you know, this kind of folkloric approach is kind of well-trodden ground if you're aware of you know, aware of theories of participatory cultures or games as a practice. You know, the idea of engaging the game is a complicated thing, and the framing device I want to use this discussion of Blaseball comes from Trevor Owens in his 2018 book, The Theory and Craft of Digital Preservation. Owens writes about folkloric properties of digital objects using the example of a story. So we take like Jack and the Beanstalk. Person to person, the story is going to have slight differences, but as long as the significant properties of that story maintains, then we are sharing the same story, even if we are engaging with it differently. Lynn McNeil in her 2013 book, Folklore Rules, describes folklore as being determined by the nature of its transmission. So treating video games as folklore or having folkloric properties is actually, it isn't limiting in that it complicates video games. It's actually it's an opportunity to consider them kind of in a different way. And now I'm going to pause for dramatic effect while I get to my notes. Yeah, so, you know, how people retell a story, or for our purposes, play Blaseball, tells us a lot about what Blaseball meant to people during the 3 years it was live. You know, there is no one way to play Blaseball because there is no one way to tell a story, or play any game for that matter, as Danny was kind of alluding to. And this is kind of encapsulated within, you know, mainstream digital heritage practice. The UNESCO guidelines kind of recognize the 4 properties of a digital object, which is the physical layer, which is the kind of material degradation of digital storage of digital objects. There's the logical layer, which is how possible it would be to recreate it if you could manage to pull the components together. There's the essential layer, which is the metadata, how we categorize digital objects. And then there is the conceptual layer, which is fundamentally, in 100 years, would humans be able to understand what this object was, what it meant to people, and how it was engaged with? So, you know, when we consider this, we have to approach preservation as an exercise in interpretation and reinterpretation. Therefore, curation then becomes an act about preserving cultural memory and folkloric content more than it does about materiality, you know, physical materiality, that is. If we, the proverbial glass case, I'm going to use the example here, you know, the kind of, the idea of taking a video game console and putting it behind glass with a little bit of context is kind of, you know, the verbiage of preservation. If we need to expand that into kind of the realm I'm talking about here, we have to include all the propaganda posters and the fan art and the musicals and all that stuff and the discourse. And it becomes a pretty unwieldy object to think about. You know, those classic preservation tactics won't necessarily work, especially when we start talking about live service games, which are constantly changing. We need a approach preservation that is equally transient, that is equally ephemeral, that is flexible, that works to undo kind of hegemonic understandings of video games and hegemonic understandings of play as these things that are created by companies who are owned by the companies and shifted only by the companies. And I think we can do that with this kind of more flexible approach. Thank you. Yes, so preserving Blaseball, I'm sorry to say, Blaseball has now shut down. As an object to be preserved, it's currently unplayable. There is no way. There are people out there who are making fans games and fan simulations, but without the kind of community behind it, the kind of popularity, it doesn't hit the same. So we take the two most popular kind of approaches to preservation, emulation, migration. They're just not viable. The Blaseball source isn't available. It was a browser-based game, so migrating it won't really do a lot. It's kind of need one before the other. And this kind of leads us to an interesting debacle, which is that we want to preserve something using those robust methods that have been established. If we look at Carson Huth's kind of axes of preservation, which he worked on looking at trying to develop a game-specific schema for preservation, and it looks very similar to the UNESCO one we outlined earlier, which is kind of this idea of representation being the basic information. There's the reference, which is kind of indexing information, and provenance, which is kind of technical, legal description, fixity, which details how stable an object is, and then context, which is very similar to that conceptual layer, which is, does this thing make sense to us? So Megan Wingett kind of, analysed this in her work looking at MMORPG preservation. And even though this was game-specific and a pretty robust means of looking at games, to use her quote, she described it as having major inadequacies in its ability to formally track relationships between software, hardware components, versions, patches, and new releases. This was 2011, right? So this is pre-Roblox, pre-Fortnite, pre-kind of our understanding of games as a service, but also games as a platform, games as a place to be in. So therefore, even something as robust as this doesn't have the flexibility for something like Folkloric, or for something like these complex interactions between users and games and developers. When we apply our ontology to something like Blaseball, which is played multi-textually, we need frameworks to help us structure specific, multifaceted, complex, most importantly, ongoing and interpretable approaches to preservation that are largely missing from video game heritage practices. Thanks so much. So, in summary, my work is largely advocacy. I'm looking to advocate for a more flexible preservation process which involves game makers. So for the game back, they already view themselves as part of that. Not every company does. But also cultural heritage participants, that is both scholars and fans alike. We can't discount the fans. They do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to preservation work. And so much is conducted by them. Their well of knowledge is such a kind of useful tool as cultural heritage professionals that trying to bridge that gap between us, them, and the developers is something I'm really interested in. This is actually a new edition, something I read about this week, which is the 2023 Game Development Report, surveyed 500 studios, and found that 95% of them are working on a service game in some capacity. This problem isn't going away. And the faster we move on it, the kind of earlier we get involved in the process as academics and cultural people who are interested in cultural heritage, the better shot we have for developing methods that actually work, that actually help. So in order for our preservation approaches to wrap around the conceptual layer of something as complex as Blaseball, it needs cooperation from everyone that will play Blaseball, that has played Blaseball, and that means cultural heritage professionals, it means game developers, it means us, the academic community. Thanks so much.